Alright, now, the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to start to alter your mask. So I'm going to take this plastic off, because I don't need it anymore. I want to be able to work with the clay. And now, I'm going to get some tools. I'm going to get a couple wooden tools, a loop tool, a needle tool. Got to look at a knife for that, because that one's broken. There we go. And I'm going to get this right here. Okay. Alright, so if I want to make a design on the outside of my mask, then I can leave this on. If I don't want to, then I can cut it off. I'm going to cut most of it off, so I'm just going to take my knife or my needle tool, whichever one you feel comfortable with, and cut it off. You can cut it off right next to the edge, or if you want to leave a little bit, you can. So when I go to cut this off, I'm going to cut around it. I'm going to leave the mask alone, and I'm going to remove the piece that I don't want on it. So I leave the mask right where it was laying, and I removed everything around it that it didn't want. Okay? My paper is a little tall, a little thick for my mask, but that's okay. He'll have an interesting shape. Okay, now, if I want to remove something, there's a couple different ways I can do that. Removing, subtraction, isn't necessarily cutting something out completely. Subtraction is carving into the clay to make a design. So, I'm going to take my loop tool, and the reason it's called a loop tool is because it makes a loop right here. And it's two different shapes. There's a rounded shape and a more squared off shape. So I can use either end. And I'm going to make a design down here on the chin. So you can see I'm just removing a little bit. Of clay. I'm not removing the whole thing. And notice I clean my tool a little bit so I don't have a whole bunch of clay built up on my loop tool. Just peel off and remove it, make it into a stack. Now this extra clay you're going to need to use later on. So what I want you to do, before I forget, is get a damp paper towel. So I get it wet. And then I wring it out. So it's not dripping wet, it's just damp. So it's not dripping water now. I can wring this out and it's not dripping, so I know it's just damp. It's not soaking wet. And then I'm going to take and wrap this piece of clay, extra piece of clay up in the paper towel. And then I'm going to grab a plastic bag, make sure there's no holes in it, because if there's any holes, it's not going to do us any good. It'll dry out. And I'm going to store this in the bag until I need it. Kind of fold it up so it closes and set it off to the side. Because right now I'm doing my subtraction. If I want to cut out the eyes, then I'm going to use the needle tool. Clean it off a little. And I'm not going to cut the entire thing out. I'm just going to cut out, I think, the whites of the eyes. I'm going to leave the pupil. So I just cut it out a piece. Now it came out kind of rough over here when I cut it out. You can see over here it's got some rough edges, so I'm just going to take my finger and smooth that out if I want it smooth. If I don't want it smooth, I can leave it. Some of the newspaper getting in there. If I need to, I can take my loop tool and remove just a little bit to smooth it off. Okay, so now I have some subtraction on the bottom. I also want to do that up here on the cheeks. I have a little piece that I'm going to remove there off of the side of the cheek. I want to make this symmetrical. You do not have to make yours symmetrical, but I'm going to keep mine symmetrical, which means whatever I do over here, I'm going to do over on the other side. So, now if you do subtraction with your little loop tool or your little needle tool, those little lines aren't going to show up very well. I don't like what I just did there. So I'm going to kind of smooth it out. Now I'm not going to add clay on because I haven't shown you how, and you might end up with an air pocket. And remember, air pockets will create an explosion in the kiln. And then you won't have a project. That's what I was doing wrong. Okay, now I got it going the right way. Okay, so I've got my subtractions on the cheek. So that's subtraction. Addition. Addition of clay needs water or slip. There's bags of slip over here. Might be able to get to one that's good. There it is. This is a heavy box. So the slip is a smaller box than the clay. So there's my slip. It's a very watery clay. So you can see, you can hear it squishy. You can see that it is pretty close to being a liquid. Okay, so now, I don't want that in there. So now I'm going to add a piece of clay. You can make a slab, again if you need to, or you can make some other things. There are coils, which is basically a snake. Or you can make a pinch pot. So I'm going to take a piece of clay and, oh, I made a mess. I got a whole bunch of little bits of clay off that box on my mask that I don't want. Okay, so I'm going to take this little piece of slab and start to make it into a snake, a coil. So I'm just going to roll it in between my hands first. And then I'm going to roll it out this way. I like to always roll it away from me. That way I keep it round. I'm putting pressure on it just slightly so that I'm not making a flat spot, and so that I can feel where I need to make more pressure, because I want an even thickness for my coil. If it's uneven, it will dry uneven and crack. And you want to make sure there's no air pockets in here. So if you needed to wedge it first, you could do so. Okay, so this is pretty even thickness. Now if I want to attach that, let's say up here on the head, wherever I'm going to attach it, I need to do what's called score and slip. So I'm going to take and mark first where it's going to touch the clay underneath. And then I'm going to take this tool that has the nice sharp edges, makes it a little easier to score. Scoring is making a bunch of little marks, a bunch of little lines. So I'm just going to score, kind of rough up that clay where it's going to be attached. And again, if you make a mistake like I just did, just smear it out if you need to. If you like it there, you like that texture, you can leave it. So I scored that one, and I score the piece that I'm attaching. So I have to score both pieces. So I have all the little score marks on there and on my mask. Now I'm going to open my bag of slip. Now this is very messy because it is pretty watery. If you don't like getting your fingers messy, you can always use a little wooden tool to scoop your slip out and put it on. I'm going to use my fingers. Put it on. Both pieces, wherever I scored is where I put this slip. This slip will dry and fire to the same color as the clay. So I slipped and scored both pieces. To that just a little bit, and now I'm going to lay it on where I scored and slipped. Clean my fingers a little bit if I want. Squish it down a little bit, and then I'm going to take this wooden tool and make sure this is attached. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of clay down around wherever I'm attaching it. On all sides, if I can reach. All sides. without changing the shape of what I want. I can always smooth it out some. Basically, I'm pulling a little bit of clay off of there. So, whenever you go to attach two pieces of clay together, you need to do a score and slip. There's my attached piece, my subtraction. I made a coil for that addition. Now I want to show you how to make a pinch pot. So you start with a ball of clay, and you're going to have to wedge it to make sure that there's no air pockets. You can do a real big pinch pot, you can do a little pinch pot, depending on what size bowl you need for this. So once I've wedged it, now I'm going to make it into a ball. I'm going to wrap this extra clay back up and put it back in my bag so it doesn't dry out. Okay, I have a ball. Now this is where you need shorter fingernails, because if you have any length of fingernails, you're going to get clay all up underneath your nails. But you put your thumb in the middle, pinch it a little bit, and turn it till you get even thickness of walls, about 1/4 of an inch thick. You don't want it too thin on one side, or on the bottom even. So I just keep pinching and turning. Pinch and turn. So I use my thumb on the inside and my fingers to push against it on the outside. Just kind of squeezing it, pinching it. You can figure out whatever method works for you, as long as you end up with a bowl kind of shape and even thickness. Like my bottom is really thick right now, so I'm going to squish that out some. Okay, now that's too big for what I want up there, so I'm going to cut it down. I'm just using my needle tool to cut it out. So I'm going to attach that up there on the head, on the eye, above the eyes, on the forehead. Now, if I attach this like this, I'm going to end up with a big air pocket in here. So I need to have a hole somewhere in there so it doesn't have an air pocket. So once I attach this, I'm going to put a hole. So I'm going to score and slip again. Here's my scoring tool. Go around and score this piece. And figure out where it's going to attach. So I've marked around the outside edge. I'm not going to score the entire inside because remember it's a hole in the inside. So I'm just going to score it just on the outside. And then I need to slip both pieces. Get that good and gooey. If your slip is more like peanut butter instead of liquid, let me know so I can add some water to it. Stick that on there. Squish it down a little bit. Wipe my fingers off. Just grabbed a paper towel, and then I gotta use my wooden tool and pull some clay down to make sure it's attached, or pull some clay up, either direction. I'm going to pull it down a little bit. Smooth it off. Now I need to make a hole in there, or it's going to be a big air pocket and explode. It probably might not explode the whole thing. It might just pop this off. But I don't want that to happen. So if I don't want it to show, I could put it on the side. If I want to make a design in there and cut it out, as long as I end up with an air pocket, air hole, so that it's not a solid piece. So my needle tool, now the thing to remember is that with clay is that it shrinks as it dries. So I want to make this slightly bigger to make sure it doesn't close back up on me. Somewhere in there it needs to be open. It doesn't have to be open through the whole thing. I'm going to do the same thing over here. It's part of my design. Remember, I said I was going to keep this symmetrical, which is a mirror image. So I pull up all those bits of clay that I don't want on there. And there's that. And then the last thing you can do is make texture. So you can get creative on how you make texture. Find different tools to make a texture. Experiment on some extra clay if you want. Again, if you use your needle tool to make a texture or anything really thin, it might not stay, or it's going to be very hard to paint. Okay, so there's my texture up here. Any little bits of clay that I don't want on there, I'm going to make sure that I remove so that it's just the texture left. So there is addition, subtraction, and texture.